Brattleboro.
We are in a situation
holding down.
My name is Don Repella. I was executive director from 1996 to, I believe, the summer of 1999. I found out about BCTV through the Alliance for Community Media. And at the time, I was operational director at Free Speech TV, the 90s channel. And I met some of the board of directors at that ACM conference. And one thing led to another, and I wound up being executive director of BCTV. At the time, it was in Boulder, Colorado. I had never lived in Brattleboro before. My wife and I moved from Boulder to Brattleboro. We had been to Brattleboro before because I did my graduate work at the University of Connecticut. So we would always come up to Brattleboro or to Vermont, either to ski or to hang out. Brattleboro actually had what I would consider like a really tight community that actually looked out for one another. The same things that we would see in the community actually would happen at BCTV. I ran 3 peg stations in my tenure of working in community media. And by far, Brattleboro or BCTV had the most active community producers and involvement from the community of any community that I worked in. The other communities I worked in were Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Pasadena, California. When I came in and I knew what I was stepping into, there had been a revolt of the community producers that believed that they were being mistreated or not being given what they thought they needed in order to produce whatever it is they wanted to produce. It took a while to get over that because they viewed me as like the old guard. I mean, there was accusations prior that people were like stepping on their First Amendment rights, trying to censor them. They thought that the requirements to gain access to equipment were too stringent, just kind of your basic community producer kind of complaints. The complaints stopped. I recall I had a series of meetings with the people that were most upset on the situation. And they basically found out that, me nor the board were trying to shut them down. We were trying to be as inclusive as we could. I led a series of community meetings, and then also a few of them gained access to the board so that they believed that their voices were being heard. There was a franchise negotiation towards the end of my tenure. I believe Comcast was trading properties with Adelphia at the time. I think this was right before the big Adelphia scandal. It was kind of weird because Brattleboro and Bellows Falls were scheduled to start negotiating the franchise agreement 1 year before the rest of the PEG stations in Vermont. So that kind of put us in a very precarious situation. And we would ask for stuff or we would try to negotiate in good faith, and at the time, the cable company really wouldn't commit to anything. And what myself and the board did is decided that, hey, we need to really get an attorney, that really knows about this stuff because we didn't want to set any precedents for the other stations for the cable service provider to use against other communities. So we got Peter Epstein as an attorney who had negotiated quite a few franchise agreements with different municipalities. We were able to acquire more funding and funding for different capital assets. There was always programming going on. There was a few times where we actually interacted with the Vermont Interactive Television as well. And we would pick up a feed from them. And they had a call-in number for people that were watching Channel 8 at the time could actually watch and call in and ask questions. It was an interactive kind of proto streaming way for the community to access political information. It was kind of amazing that it was able to be pulled off. Well, there was a show that was called Brattleboro Live, and that was probably, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call it the most popular program that was there. And it was a live show that took place on Saturday nights. It was call in. It was kind of a variety show. And they would invite people from the community just to drop into the studio up on the third floor and say whatever they wanted to say. So sometimes there were bands there. People from the community actually would come in and say their piece. There were comedians there, there were dancers there. One of my pushes when I was there was to get more local nonprofit within the community. So there were the Mental Health Alliance had a program that was going there. And I don't know if this organization is still there or not, but it was called Brattleboro Free Radio. They came in and there were youth programs that we had like collaborated with those guys. And at the time, I think there were about 15 to 20 high school kids that would come in and utilize the station, and they generated quite a bit of programming. But Brattleboro's programming was extremely eclectic. It ran the gamut from select board meetings to crazy experimental stuff that's actually art, not crazy art. At the time, I was really too young in my career to really appreciate the diversity that was actually in Brattleboro. I've grown over time to like really appreciate it. I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it. The rules were there to be the rules and protect the station from some kind of harm that might come its way. My philosophy was, hey, if you want to make it, I'm going to help you make it. I'm going to help you find your voice. And I'm not going to put any kind of obstacles in your way. Well, when I came in, it was me and Gloria Aversano, who I think we called her the station manager at the time. It was all volunteer, and Gloria and I were the only two paid positions. Then there was, towards the end of my time, we were actually able to hire a community coordinator, and her name was Christine Peck. There were two of us to start, and then there were three of us when I left. At the time, there was another volunteer. However, she wasn't like a production volunteer. Her name was Harriet Gelfin. She assisted greatly in structuring the economic part of being able to hire the community coordinator and to pay video production staff to go out and record the Vernon and Gifford meetings. The handing off, I was in communication with the board and with the ED that was after me. And I think that, I would hope that I left the station in pretty good shape from a management, or executive director point of view. But I was in communication with that group of people for probably about a year after I left, just kind of consulting and, made myself available to answer any questions. And when I left BCTV, I left for Pittsburgh Community Television, primarily because at the time, my wife and I thought that we needed a bigger community because Brattleboro was very limited. And, if you wanted to see a movie or something, we would have to drive to Springfield. I mean, there was a little theater that got kind of third quality prints and stuff like that. Or, there's only so many times you can eat at the Putney Inn before, so we wanted a larger community to offer more stuff. In hindsight, now I would totally give up what I considered at the time the conveniences that a larger community would give for the community that Brattleboro gave, if that makes any sense. So I think I left the station okay. I mean, we had Peter Epstein there. There was a good core of community producers, and the board at the time was really good. And we had gotten involved more with the goings on of the state. I think it was pretty good, and that's how I kind of handled it. I mean, for years, I felt that I was still connected to the Brattleboro community, and would call up Tim Johnson or Ken Hiley or Mary Elder or Christina, a lot of people that I had worked with there. In fact, I'm still in communication with quite a few of them. What I do now is I work for a very big rental house. I work with producers and DPs, and quite honestly, it's not much different. It's the same personalities, only, with community access, there's not a lot of money. And with what I'm doing now, there's a lot of money. There's not a whole lot of difference, except for when you're doing a bunch of commercial or Hollywood type industry work, there's actually more community good and more heartfelt made programming with my career from previous years than current stuff. But I would jump back and I would do most of it the same, except for I probably wouldn't leave. I would probably find other ways to to satisfy a desire to like see something contemporary or other ways to like try to make money.